Hey Gators, welcome to your second to last media and criminal justice policy lecture, second to last lecture. This is module 6, part 6, and we're going to be looking at chapters 10 and 11 to finish up this module. So let's get started. So in our overview, we're going to be studying new media, crime, and justice in terms of criminality, victimization, law enforcement, the courts, corrections, and then also the future of crime and justice. So what do we mean by new media? The means of mass communication by using digital technology such as the internet. It'll be interesting when that becomes old. But it often includes interactive feedback of users, creative participation of contributors, and some examples of new media are telephones, smartphones and cell phones, computers, virtual worlds, single media, website games, gaming, human and computer interfaces, computer animation, interactive computer installations, and apps, okay? So this is juxtaposed to old media, which is characterized as television, radio, and print media, okay? So that's kind of the older way of doing things. It's still viable, still out there. But you have to remember, new media has not been as pervasive in everyone's life as you think. So we do have members of this class that are from older generations, and they probably didn't touch a computer until high school or college, or maybe even their first job, okay? Or maybe even after that. I know I didn't touch a computer until I was 6, but the computer I touched was monochrome mainframe. I had to stick a really large floppy disk in the drive to even get a program to run. If I wanted to print anything, it was all dot matrix printing, which took forever. And now we think about how primitive all this is. I did not use a mouse until I got to probably junior high school. We finally had a computer with a mouse. But again, we have students in the class that were born with cell phones firmly in place, with the internet firmly in place, and having most households on the internet. But remember, things like YouTube, they're not that old. YouTube came out in 2005, and then Twitter and Facebook years later, okay, 2008, 2011. So it's not that old as far as when you think about television, radio, and print. It's been around for decades. So it's still evolving. So coming to evolving society has led to new media. So there's been a demand for it, and we know that. New media is that digital information that's quickly and easily shared among large amounts of people, and that's what Surratt talks about in the chapter. So new media and legacy media, they're not necessarily different in content, although I will say I don't think we saw as many stupid cat videos back in the day like we see now, but I'm sure they were out there. The differences really are in accessibility, the access to the content, the distribution of content, and the creation of content. Again, that interaction between user and the primary publisher, and the exchange and the consumption. So it's important to remember that new media allows the consumers of the media to also be distributors as well as producers of their own media. And again, this begs that question we asked a few modules ago of who is a journalist? Because everyone can film and everyone can post and share now. So how do we actually identify what real journalism is? Communication in the 21st century is really unique because people communicate more frequently but less often have face-to-face interaction. So we're kind of having our identities framed by our online presence rather than our physical presence. They voluntarily take part in publicly accessible self-surveillance. So again, a lot of these accounts are public and we share them in very visible ways. And we do not just observe media, but we can play a role in how it's presented, right? With that commenting, with sharing, shaping kind of the demand for the story, and then pressing for things like retractions and corrections, having an outcry or a call for more stories like this, and again, using it for things like social movements. So some of the negatives of new media when it comes to crime: it provides new ways to commit old crimes. It creates entirely new types of crime, like cybercrime, using media to obtain trust and gain access to accounts with phishing scams, passwords, email, compromises, hacking, cyber theft, identity fraud, things like that. False information is also spread quickly, so you have to be very careful. And an example given is you can get a moral panic from a false school shooting threat that could happen and have very serious results. We also see an increase in criminality due to increased communication. So example like flash mobs and performance crime. And we're going to talk about this in more detail. So some of the questions raised by new media are really what is considered a crime within social media? As far as, how can you use social media to harm someone else? Well, definitely cyberbullying is out there. And then what evidence based on and from social media is actually admissible in court? Things like posts and tweets, determination of motive, using substantive facts, and identifying witnesses by using that video surveillance that gets posted or shared. And then again, another question, what restrictions on new media access can be included in a sentence? So we think about things like sex offenders and how maybe they used social media to groom their victims and gain trust of their victims. Can we actually tell them they're not allowed on social media anymore? And we've seen this happen in different states. So I really like this photo because it kind of illustrates the fact that so much of our identity is now a digital identity. So this is a police lineup of executives, maybe for a white collar crime. And, essentially we're identifying them by their laptop, as instead of their face, looking at that cyber trail of evidence and criminality rather than maybe their more personal or physical one. So this picture to me is kind of indicative of some of where we're going with new media and the way we used to do things versus how we do things now. So let's look at social media evidence in court for an example. So this is an infographic I like to share with students. As far as criminal law is concerned, in 2009, Daniel Knight Hayden became the first person to be prosecuted for his tweets. He wanted a war against the US government and threatened via tweet to cut cops' heads off. And they used that against him as damning evidence. In April 2016, a couple was arrested in Ohio after they allegedly robbed a bank and then posted pictures of themselves with wads of cash on Facebook. It's like this grandstanding. Look what I did. This is great. Really stupid. Brooklyn rapper Nino Best's Instagram post led to the largest gun bust in New York City history. So again, these are evidence obtained through social media. So when we think about court, the burden of proof in social media postings, there is a burden of authenticating that the social media postings were made by the defendant as opposed to someone else using his or her account. So this is what we look at. So the methods that should have been used to also corroborate who wrote the social media post include verifying the IP address of who made it, verifying who created and had access to the email account associated with it or the cell phone number associated with it, and then using any other circumstantial evidence available that suggests the identity of the author of the post. So now prosecutors are going to need, cybercrime experts and IT professionals to help them wade through all this information to do the authentication. So again, just by way of review, those 5 impacts on criminality include new ways to commit old crimes, new types of crime to commit, new ways to commit crimes as a social statement, and that kind of goes into the performance crime we talked about, copycat crimes, which again, we can see not as many pieces of evidence for that in another module we looked at, and then new behaviors of potential crime victims. So let's look at these. Providing new means for old crimes to be committed. So this impacts the commission of and participation in crime. So your author Surratt talks about crime sourcing, which is taking a portion of a criminal act and outsourcing it to a crowd of witting or unwitting helpers. So this might be fleeing a crime scene and maybe trying to make it like a stunt or some kind of attempt at a viral video, and suddenly people are participating in it, maybe not sure they are. We certainly also see this with crimes of terrorism. I teach a whole class on terrorism, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but we see this with cyber attacks fueled by online presence, global recruitment, reaching out to members, trying to get them to join your cause, and then certainly mass exposure to propaganda, messaging, and claiming credit for an attack and using social media or new media to do that. And then finally, theft and fraud. Certainly just a new means of doing the same old unlawful taking of someone's property. So Surratt and myself forecast this to be really the most significant crime issue linked to new media due to the fact that unlawful taking can now happen in so many different ways. We've also had new types of crime being created due to new media. So let's talk about flash mobs. So again, these aren't always criminally driven, but you can still do a lot of harm. So not only can we do unlawful taking, if we flash mob a store and everybody kind of raids the shelves, but you can get disturbing the peace, inciting a riot, destruction of property, trespassing, loitering, and personal injury. So we do have current laws that will deal with some of the aftermath of a flash mob. It'll be interesting to see if a flash mob itself gets on the books, if we can see that the intention is for criminal motive and criminal activity, or maybe just criminal mischief. It also raises new questions. Should virtual victimization be considered in the same way? And this really gets at cyberbullying. So occasionally I have students from past generations that sometimes struggle to identify with what cyberbullying actually feels like. And so the example I give them is this. You know, when you were in junior high and high school and wanted to share something with somebody, you probably passed a written note or left a letter in their locker, or you wanted to humiliate someone, you might do the same thing, a smear campaign of some kind, or confronting someone in the hallway and a crowd ensues, maybe putting something in the school newspaper about them that wasn't true. So there's lots of ways to gossip and slander people. But when you think about it with things like text messaging, sharing, viral videos, you can now jump someone in your school hallway and put it on YouTube and let the entire world see it. So public humiliation is now exponential. Not only are the bystanders or the people local to you knowing about it, the whole world is now knowing about it and has potential access to this thing that happened to you that's really embarrassing. Even if it's not true, it can be suggestive of something about you and completely devastating and demoralizing. And you guys probably remember from school how vicious some of these things can be. Things based on stereotypes, threats, and real fear that you can have from things that people are saying. There are now, last time I counted, 14 states that actually have criminal laws that deal with cyberbullying because they got tired of seeing tragic suicides as a result of cyberbullying. And so if they can connect the cyberbullying activity to the suicide, then you can be prosecuted now for that. And it's interesting to see that happen. We also see performance crime. This is crime that is purposely committed to gain attention in the new media reality world. And so this is trying to go viral, making a video, a post, something that people really like and pay attention to. But it happens in harmful ways. So years ago, I saw teens getting a kick out of going downtown in the city, finding a homeless person, and then basically jumping them, beating them up, filming it all on camera, and then posting it on social media. To me, that's just completely sick and wrong. We've also seen it with things like flash mobs, stealing from the store, and those are acts of commission, right? Things that you did to someone else to harm them. We also see it with acts of omission, where people are so desperate to capture something on camera that they fail to intervene when they should. So an act of omission is a failure to act. So we saw people, being burned to death in a car and it being filmed, and nobody trying to put the fire out or helping them. Trying to put murders and deaths and torture and those kinds of harms on social media. And more social media companies are putting a crackdown on this and trying to eliminate those videos as soon as they're posted because of how much destruction it has, and also how it can bear on a case. Should that case come to trial, we have to be really careful about that. So new media and criminal victimization has definitely changed that landscape. It's been changed based on changing methods of communications. And unfortunately, if you're working on the high-risk side or the social work, the clinical side, the counseling side, working with at-risk youth or maybe in probation, it's led to poor risk assessments. So you can have a lot of cries for help that happen through new media, but they go unanswered or they go unflagged. Or maybe it's just a venting process, but oftentimes it is reflective of very powerful emotions going on in that person that might need some intervention when you think about it. So and then we are quick to blame people. Well, this person went on a rant of how they were going to shoot up their school. Why didn't you guys see this? With the amount of information that comes out across a crisis team's desk, sometimes it's hard to authenticate and legitimize actual threats versus someone just struggling inside. But clearly now the pressure's on for risk assessment for people that are going to go out and harm somebody else. And I don't know that we've made this a perfect science yet. We're trying. Key factors also include a feeling of safety by the victim, where we start seeing changing behaviors like not leaving your house, always staying armed with some kind of weapon, paranoia and behaviors that would go with paranoia, only going places in groups, being very careful with your computer and your cell phone and your personal belongings, beyond that which would just be good security. It also adds to sharing of criminal acts on the internet. So that adds a layer of victimization, again, based on that public humiliation and victim shaming, which are very, very serious things. Let's talk about law enforcement. So with law enforcement, I remember back in the days where I was on Facebook. I'm actually not on Facebook anymore. But when I was on, one of the first things I did was I wanted to friend the FBI and friend my local sheriff's office. And then I had these questions like, is that really the FBI or is that someone posing as the FBI? So we had trouble authenticating the accounts. But now that all these criminal justice agencies have an online presence, and especially law enforcement, it's provided new methods of addressing crime, both proactively and reactively. So this is seen in investigation, pursuit of suspects, and even crime prevention. So media crime has alert systems now, which have really replaced neighborhood watch and other methods. So now we're all kind of waiting for that tweet or that alert that comes through some kind of social media application. Hey, this is going on in your neighborhood. We just thought you should know. And that happens quicker and more efficiently than neighbors going around door to door holding a rally. Media also made public by the offenders supply evidence. So sometimes offenders put pictures of them doing their crimes out there, and we can use that at trial, as we illustrated earlier, which is kind of interesting. Let's talk about new media and the courts. So essentially, new media and technology has had very positive effects when it comes to court, because it can actually increase a faster case processing time because evidence can be gathered quickly and virtually. It does also create a reduction in court delays because we can kind of establish probable cause a little faster. Again, with information sharing, you can get judges to issue warrants through electronic means now. So we've had a lot of really great effects from this. Or they can approve things through their phone or through their email account very quickly, again, not having to go into the office and do paperwork. However, it has had a huge impact on the jury. So think about this. It could undermine the integrity of the system by possibly removing the trial fairness. So now our perception of fairness has changed because pervasively so, social media is going to get after us and cloud our thinking before we even get to the trial or even receiving the jury summons. There was a shift of the public to be more actively participating in the trial process. So now we're all kind of watching the trial. We're all potential jurors. We saw that in the O.J. Simpson trial. We talked about this with pretrial publicity. Trying to find fair and impartial juries is very difficult with such a celebrity case. And essentially the audience is the trial observer and trial participant because they're because of the gained access to the courtroom. Let's talk about the attorney activity. So it's really hard to identify what is actually ethical for attorneys as far as social media goes. Originally, it's written in regards to phones and audio recordings, those laws, but now we have to expand them into this digital new media. And new media has revealed new methods. So we now have quick access to jury information. It actually changes how voir dire occurs. So remember, voir dire is jury selection. You could, if jury selection was taking several days to complete, you could Google or investigate the online presence of potential jurors to try to identify their biases ahead of time and come up with questions you could use to eliminate them. So, I mean, that's huge. I mean, we haven't had that problem before. New media as evidence. So again, it can provide evidence regarding what the individual is thinking or doing at very specific times because new media has these time date stamps on what we do. It also has led to an increased bail amount and revocation of release. So that's kind of been interesting to follow. And lawyers will often tell their clients to e-dump, right? To eliminate any social media pages and activity they have quickly. So you see destruction of evidence going on and people trying to recover it. Access to cell phones are commonly requested. You can issue subpoenas to subpoena and commandeer hard drives, cell phones. We know that, and we have kind of digital forensics that has emerged as a really impressive field. You can take whole college classes on digital forensics. You can get certificates in it and training. The privacy laws actually do vary by state. So location and tracking are often considered searchable on an arrested person, so we can identify where they last were and use it at trial. So new media and jurors, again, with such easy access to information through new media, it's difficult to remove the external influences on the courtroom. So now pretrial publicity is more difficult than ever. And misuse of media by jurors has led to mistrials, juror dismissal, and contempt of court. So countermeasures are often taken. So the judge will issue these bench instructions that are reinforced throughout the court proceeding as to how to treat the evidence, how to handle themselves in their communications when they're not in deliberation, when they're kind of retreating. And then most judges really do not see new media as a threat to fairness and may not take extra precautions. And so again, sometimes this has to do with generational experiences and ideas about what new media is about and how it could potentially be used. Let's talk finally, though, about corrections. So there is a more general goal in corrections. We actually limit access to new media, and we talked about this with the sex offenders. So again, with complete isolation, social isolation, and physical isolation, that has obviously been limited, and cell phones aren't even allowed in most prisons and jails because it's contraband. And you can bring in all kinds of information that way. Offenders can also use this media to harass victims, or what law enforcement might call intimidating a witness. And so that's why all phone calls are monitored. And we can use that at trial as well. So there is a question of if a strict limitation on new media is constitutional. So that's kind of playing out in the courts a little bit. It can be banned if new media is directly linked with the crime committed. So if you used your Facebook account to target young people and pose as a friend of a friend, get them to go to a school dance, tell them to meet you by the bathrooms, and then you go assault them, yes, then we can say you use that to groom your victims and to gain their trust. Then certainly, yeah. But if it doesn't have anything to do with the crime, that might be a tougher case to be made. So there are blanket bans used in corrections where you do get internet, but of course no pornography, and it's a very limited access internet to look up case law. It's replaced most law libraries now available in correctional institutions. And there is allowed monitoring of media use in corrections because, again, that is perfectly constitutional to monitor the communications of inmates. They have not forfeited that right, the freedom of speech in prison. They are supervised by the state. So that monitoring is permitted. And then finally, the future of crime and justice. So we're wrapping up. New media can create moral panics and can keep up panic about events that would have otherwise lost attention and died down. So we have to think about those consequences. Media wants to keep the panic up to ensure interest, but again, at what cost? And however, the fear of criminal offenders is really not enough. We must also create a fear of inaction, a lack of punitiveness in the criminal justice system. And so really the ultimate question for this module is, what should the criminal justice do in response? And so most of the response has been, if you can't beat them, join them. Let's have Facebook pages too. Let's use this media to our advantage. And we have seen success with that. But again, it doesn't overrule or negate some of those negative effects as well. So we have to keep our eye out on this. That wraps up this lecture. Let me know if you have questions, and we'll see you next time.